Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here. I think there's a microphone-y thing. I'm not sure it will make much difference. You can hear me okay at the back? That's fine. Assembly voices. So yeah, my day job now is training the next generation of outstanding teachers at the University of Roehampton, which I enjoy so much, I really do. I've been doing that for 4 years. It seems like considerably more. Roehampton years are like dog years. They're sort of 6 in human terms. Before that, 18 years across 4 different schools, much of that time as a primary ICT coordinator. But most recently is 3 years as a head teacher. Head teachers in the room? Okay, your head teachers deserve so much respect and gratitude. You know, prematurely great. I'm not nearly as old as I look. I do other things too, so I've recently stepped down as chair of NACE, which has been good fun. I'm on the board for computing at schools. I'm involved with curriculum development work here and elsewhere. Of the words for the title here, Agile Pedagogy, I know much more about the second, the teaching thing, than I do about the first, which is an approach to software development. Those of you who've got degrees in computing, computer science, software engineering, tell me about the mistakes. Feel free to interrupt during, but certainly come up and correct the errors afterwards if you don't spot them as we're working our way through. So as I say, working at Roehampton University, Roehampton, like a couple of other universities, is a collegiate institution. We're made up of 4 colleges, and I'm based at FROEBEL College, which is named after the 19th century German educationalist Friedrich Froebel. That's actually our Vice-Chancellor's office. Mine is laid out of green blocks and some distance away from that. There you go. Froebel is known for a couple of things, really. The first is an invention, and it's the invention of the kindergarten, which might not be, you know, one of those things you think about as somebody inventing something, but Froebel pioneered that sort of approach to early childhood education. Who are the early years specialists in the room? There must be more than you are. Other people teaching in early years, foundation stage? Oh, we've got a few hands up. Okay, what do you reckon? Would it pass its Ofsted YFS inspection if there was No. I mean, the adult-child ratio is roughly of the order that Liz Truss would be still happy about, even if we're not necessarily. I'm not sure that the 2 practitioners here are necessarily directing the learning that's happening. Nevertheless, who in the room is going to argue that learning's taking place? Look at that rich environment. Look at all of the opportunities for learning. Look at the sort of conversations that the artist has captured here taking place. Look at all of the opportunities for learning about the world through interacting with the world through direct experience. And that's very much at the heart of Froebel's philosophy of education, and something which I hope we still stay true to at Roehampton. The other thing he's known for is this sequence of presents. So as a set of 12 gifts, as they're called, which you give to the child at stages during their very early development. This is somewhere around 5 or 6 in the sequence if memory serves. And it's a collection of, obviously, building blocks. We're familiar with Lego, and we're familiar with things like Stickle Bricks and Meccano and Duplo and so on more recently. But Froebel pretty much cottoned on to the idea that presents like that, a gift like that, given into the hand of a child, is going to be a formative experience for them in terms of their early education. So why? In your early years classrooms, in your nurseries, in your reception classes, you still, I hope, let children play with things that look not that different from what's on the screen behind you. Why do we do that? Why do we put blocks like that into the hands of small children? This is not a rhetorical question. To be creative, to make something that wasn't there before, to original work that's valued. And I hope that the practitioners and their friends do value the creative work of that. Other things? Problem solving. I want to make it like this. Why don't you stand up? Well, I'm going to try it a different way. I'm solving a problem and creating a problem in more than one sense, perhaps, and then solving that problem. Anything else?
Opportunities for representational play.
Oh, yes, again, making a house or something. Absolutely. Learning about the world around them by modelling an aspect of that world. Lovely. Any other reasons?
Fine motor skills.
Fine motor skills, very, very good. Absolutely, really important thing, isn't it? I think there's even more to it than that. Conservation of mass, conservation of number, conservation of volume. Yeah? The properties of structures. Why will this stay up and this won't? Gravity works downwards. I drop the block, which direction does it move? He eats something even as fundamental as that. By putting blocks like that into the hands of small children. They learn fundamental things about how the world around them works, forming these mental schema, if you'll allow me, through direct practical experience. Nobody in the room said so that they become architects, so that they become building workers, so they become construction engineers. Was that anywhere in your mind and you just didn't want to say? That ain't why we do it, is it? Nevertheless, some will. And, famously, Frank Lloyd Wright, great American architect, went to a FROEBEL kindergarten, and there are those arguing, I think Lloyd Wright himself admitted, that those early childhood experiences coloured at least some of his work as an architect. It's plausible, isn't it? So, it's through putting things like that, putting building blocks like that, and there's no coincidence that Scratch is developed by MIT's lifelong kindergarten group into the hands of children. They learn about how the world around them works, and that's the basis of this computing curriculum. I want to deal with the P word, the pedagogy thing, because it isn't necessarily what you think it is. We have the notion of the pedagogue as the traditional didactic teacher, and okay, that's kind of how it was for large swathes of human history. But if you go back to the etymology of where the word comes from, then it's not the teacher. It's the slave in the Greek household, or the slave in the Roman household, who took the child to the place where learning happened. And whilst many of us might identify with the slavery thing, at the moment, actually, we're the ones who take them to the place where they learn, rather than necessarily telling them all of the stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with telling children things, that's absolutely fine. And a little more on the pedagogy side of things. PAPERT, writing back in 1991, had the insight, absolutely right, that, we have the Piagetian, teacher training lecture, occupational hazard here, you have the Piagetian stuff, you remember your PGCE lectures, of learning through experience, of forming those schema. You have the Vygotsky stuff of learning through conversation, but PAPERT's great insight was we learn best, we make these mental schema through making things to show to other people, and right at the heart of pedagogy for computing is that exact idea. And those of you who have worked in software development, who've got background in computer science, well, I'm sure, I hope, see that's exactly part of how you've learned the computing, the programming that you know, by making things for other people. It's not reading the books. Have you ever tried reading one of these computing manuals or manuals about computer programming languages? It's so difficult to acquire this stuff. Even the lovely, lovely things like Codecademy and the LearnPython.org stuff where you just interact with it. It's fine so far, but making something in the language is so much about how you learn that language and learn to do things. Okay, moving on from the pedagogy stuff to talk about software development now. Those of you, who are the secondary school teachers in the room? There's more than that. I'm sure there's more than that. Nothing to be ashamed of, really. Okay, if you're teaching up at GCSE, certainly at A-level these days, for ICT or probably computing, you have this notion of the waterfall design methodology for how software gets written, which is roughly something like that. We start with a list of requirements. Somebody wearing a very nice suit sitting in one of those corner offices with big desks says, the software should do this, that, the other. Okay, they're very, very well paid. Don't actually do much of the coding themselves, though. Another team of people, still probably wearing suits, come up with a specification for how the software is to do that, what it's actually going to do. Other people, typically not wearing suits anymore, typically not so well paid, not generally much say in the first two stages, have the job of actually implementing that. In their line of work, they call them programmers. You need to do the verification thing, an absolutely crucial step in the process. You've got to test that it works. And then usually there's an opportunity for a bit of an ongoing contract, sending out the service packs, making sure that it's kept up to date, and so on. Have I got that vaguely right? Those are teaching this properly? Okay, any big mistakes so far? Good. And we know that that works incredibly well for large-scale software development projects in the public sector, like, for example, the NHS data. Anyhow, there are other ways of getting software written, which don't necessarily put so much emphasis on getting the plan right at the start, but to adapt and change. And that's where we're going with this Agile stuff. But anyhow, in terms of large-scale public sector projects, you can have the same methodology applied to other things too. For instance, a computing curriculum. You have a Secretary of State who bet he's got a corner office in Sanctuary Building and says, oh, we need computing on the national curriculum. Blah, blah, blah. Other people, and unfortunately, one of them, who I don't think are suit for meetings, meet in sort of basement conference rooms and design a computing curriculum to meet that particular requirement. Other people, again, not normally so well paid, very rarely wearing suits, have the job of implementing that. In our line of work, we call them teachers. And we do plenty of the verification side, don't we? Oh yes, we do lots and lots of testing in our line of work too. And once in a while, if it turns out that it's not doing what we said it was supposed to do, we'll send out the service pack. Anybody remember those QCDA schemes of work the last time around? Don't expect one of those this time around. So I think there are parallels there. You might argue, but Miles, we know this works so well for public sector software deployment. How could anybody doubt that it will work just as effectively for public sector curriculum, public sector education specifications? Well, I wonder. I really do. And so you get people like the former, thankfully, Schools Minister Nick Gibb making statements like this: let's get it right, and then we won't have to keep changing it. Teachers keep complaining that we keep changing everything. They just want it right for once, and a curriculum that will last 1,000 more issues. I'm putting words into his mouth. Kind of. Okay. I would count it a success when teachers are able actually to laminate their lesson plans and recycle. I think it means reuse them from September to September. Is that what you're looking for? Yes? Yeah? Do them once, and then you don't need to keep doing any more planning, but just keep reusing them. Any problems with that idea? Okay, what are the problems with that idea?
Changing governments.
Okay, so you don't think they're going to actually keep those requirements the same, they're going to keep moving those goalposts. You're kind of used to that. Even if they promise not to. Even if Stephen Triggs said, yeah, we like that, we'll keep that, we won't make any more changes. Would there still be problems with this approach? Changing world, yes! We're talking about a subject. There's so much of it is at the very, very cutting edge. Yeah? Think what it was like when the old curriculum was written. Anybody remember produced back in 1999? Windows 98, or if you're really unfortunate, Windows ME. Have you noticed how Windows versions go good, bad, all the way through Windows 7 is fine. Connecting to the internet. Yeah, CD-ROMs for software, 3.5-inch floppy disks, 1.44 meg. Sorry? Yeah, I think we got rid of those before 99. Yes, I remember. And somebody really remembers cassette tape. Okay, that's you don't get the same answer to our trainees anymore. I feel old. So we have this changing domain. There are other reasons why laminated lesson plans aren't going to be tremendously helpful. Yes. You've got a different set of children in front of you. Each of those is a different child. Assuming one lesson plan will work for all 30 children, you're pushing your luck. Assuming it will work for every class you ever teach, that's really ambitious stuff. So I think that, I mean, it's political rhetoric, and he's making a point about let's not keep changing this, but it's a silly thing to say, isn't it? Because of this. You know, we have this iterative approach to what we do in terms of our lesson plans. Okay, I'm not sure where you start on this, but you do your lesson plans. You then go in and teach the lesson. You do the testing, the verification thing. Is it doing what it's supposed to do? And then hopefully you do that evaluation, and then you change your lesson plans. You might not be doing this with filling in forms like we make our trainees do. But some of that's going on in your head, even if it's not going on in paper. What worked about this lesson? What do I need to change for the next time round? They do exactly the same thing when it comes to software development. You know, the waterfall approach. There are better ways of developing software than that. And you have this notion of iterative development. And isn't that so similar to what we have in our line of work when it comes to that planning, teaching, assessing cycle? And isn't that a better way of thinking about it than here's one approach to the curriculum, just get on and teach it, folks, because it's bound to be right. So the idea here is a really very, very simple one. And I'm just going to give you lots and lots more examples of the same thing. Look at what they do in the world of software development. Look at how they go about writing code. And they're doing that really, really well. And borrow some of those ideas. Try and apply those ideas in our world of teaching. Draw the parallels from one domain through into the other domain. We heard this morning about the importance of computational thinking in the new curriculum. That's thinking like a computer scientist, using those tools of computer science to solve problems. What I'm proposing to you is the notion of computational teaching. Try teaching the same way that a computer scientist codes software. Try taking some of their insights and applying them to our domain. So the computational thinking thing, you know, decomposition as an aspect of that. Take big problems, break them down into smaller problems. Isn't that something we do all the time? Here's a problem of study. Oh, thank you very much. That's, you know, one big problem. Let's tackle that bit at a time. How are we going to teach the coding stuff? How are they going to teach that internet stuff? We break that big problem up into those smaller units. We start with a program study, we produce a scheme of work, we produce medium-term plans, we maybe produce lesson plans, or we at least think about planning lessons. Look for the common patterns there. Okay, we have one particular common pattern of the three-part lesson. There are other patterns that we can apply in our line of work to how we do a lesson, how we do assessment. You know, we are all solving very, very similar problems. Let's start sharing those approaches to how we tackle this sort of problem with one another, and looking for the generic stuff where we can solve a class of problems rather than each problem individually. And looking at abstraction, now this is the planning thing, isn't it? We have one very, very top-level document, studying the aims of a national curriculum, and then we get into the detail, and we get into more detail as we get more and more sort of granular control over that. The Secretary of State is not interested in the lesson plans, he even says so in the education white paper. But he is interested in the aims of a national curriculum. At some point, you know, where you take responsibility for a particular granular level of this. I suspect many of your head teachers are not particularly interested in the details of your lesson plans, but I bet they're interested in the medium-term plan of the scheme of work. We take one model and we look at the broad areas of that, and then the detail is something which we hide below a level of abstraction. And then, you know, what is lesson planning, or what is medium-term planning, other than coming up with an algorithm, coming up with a set of steps that you follow in order to achieve a particular objective? Creating knowledge, creating connections between the neurons in children's heads in our line of work, making a computer do something in their line of work. So, as I say, the idea is a simple one. Let's deal with this Agile stuff in a little more detail there. Agile, it's a methodology which took the ideas of this waterfall and said, okay, they're useful, they're helpful, but there is more to it than that. That's not what we went into this line of work for. So it says that yes, the processes and tools are important, but the individuals and the interactions are more important. That whilst comprehensive documentation matters, actually getting working software is far, far more powerful. And okay, we need to have contract negotiation. We need to know exactly what we're supposed to be doing and what the requirements are. But actually working with our customers to produce something that they want rather than merely said that they would like is far more powerful. And yeah, following your plan matters, but respond to the change. So those ideas, the big ideas which underpin this Agile movement in software development, are things which apply, I think, immediately in our line of work. Let's focus much more on the children that we're working with, the individuals in the class in front of us, and our interactions with them. But be willing to do things differently when things don't quite work. You know, the responding to change thing, fourth point. Isn't that the mark of the outstanding teacher? What do we look for when we go and see trainees teaching out in schools? The ones who will stick to their lesson plan no matter what happens, or the ones who realise that actually going off the lesson plan because of what happens during the lesson is exactly the right thing to do. I bet that H&I would look for exactly the same. And okay, the working software, fine, have your documentation, have your comprehensive lesson plan, and so on. But what you're really looking for is building that working knowledge in children's heads, changing the mental structures, their understanding of reality. And the customer collaboration thing is interesting. And who are your customers? Who do you see as the client for your job? Again, not a rhetorical question, I'm interested in your answers. The children. That's who I'd see it as. Was anybody immediately thinking of a different stakeholder group? Parents. Governors is interesting. Nobody thinking it's the Secretary of State or the country or the government or industry or anything. I mean, I'm fortunate, I think, that throughout my teaching career I've seen my principal accountability as to the children that I'm teaching. It's their lives that I'm potentially ruining what did I do? Yeah? Okay, I have other people checking I'm doing the job. Right. But, you know, for good or ill, it can change the children's lives. I hope for good more times than not. So yeah, customer collaboration, working in partnership with the learners that we have with us, rather than necessarily worrying about the details of exactly what we're supposed to be doing. We're thinking about their lives and our interactions with the individuals in the group. Now, am I right, or am I being very, very naive here, that actually when you translate those into education terms or teaching terms, that's kind of why you started doing this job in the first place, isn't it? That very few of us went into the profession because, oh, we love writing documentation and producing schemes of work, and so on. Or we love the sort of whole process and the tool set that using an interactive whiteboard, that's why we're doing this job. No, it's not about those things on the right for us, is it? Okay. You know, that's not to say they don't matter, they're not important things. But let's keep our focus over on the left-hand side of the screen. And you know, that seems to work when it comes to writing code. And I think most of us, I hope in our heart of hearts, know that actually if we put our focus and our energies and our efforts onto that left-hand side, the right-hand side, you know, okay, less important, not unimportant, but focusing on the left-hand side will produce the working software equivalent. Children who know stuff, children who can do stuff, children who love learning in the end. They take this in detail, and they take this and they go into more detail about these ideas. You have this cluster of, I think it's a dozen, agile principles, and again these translate into our domain too. I'm not going to do all 12, but here's 4 as an example. Welcome changing requirements even late in the development. Don't laminate your lesson plans. Depending on what happens during the lesson, change the lesson. Yeah? The questions that come up, respond to those. When it's obviously not working, change what you're doing, look for a better way of doing that. Harnessing the change to the customer's competitive advantage, to the children's benefit, I suppose, in our language. And then this notion of, you know, the best way to get a project done is to get motivated people on it and let them get on with that. Find them the environment. This is back to the FROEBELian stuff, isn't it? Trust them to get the job done. Now the key thing, I think, the key challenge for us is the motivation stuff. And isn't it a shame that nowhere in the National Curriculum document, as far as I can see, does it talk about inculcating the love of learning? Does he assume that we're going to do that anyhow? Perhaps that's what's missing. But you know, providing the motivation, giving them, sharing something of your passion, your enthusiasm with the learners in your class, so that they can work together to get this stuff done, so that they want to learn these things. So when the Scratch program or the Python script or the whatever doesn't work, they're really eager to overcome those difficulties for themselves and to get something done rather than, what do I do now? Finish question 3 or finish 8 or what comes next. And then, yeah, I love this one. Wouldn't it be nice if we did this more in education? Maximizing the amount of work not done. Focusing on the stuff that really does matter. I think those of you with a background in programming, computer science, software development, whatever, probably get hugely frustrated by the amount of extra crud. I suspect it's not just those with programming, software development, and computing in their background. Extra crud that you have to do day in, day out as part of this job of the teacher, which actually doesn't seem to have that much impact on children's learning. Okay, there's risk aversion and so on, and we need to have documentation for these things, but how much of your time do you spend doing things which actually don't seem to make much difference? And if only SLT or the people who look after your job could focus on letting you just focus on the stuff that really does matter, the interactions with the children, building their learning, wouldn't the job be much more fun and much more effective as well? And then, yeah, let's review what we do. Have your plenaries by all means. Have the review meetings where not only do you look at what the outcomes are, but you look at what the processes are. How many of you will ask your children on a regular basis, are there ways that I could improve my lessons? How could I make my teaching better for you? Does anybody do that in the room? What do they say? Do you mind saying what do they say?
Well, sometimes they say it's boring and it's not something they want to do.
Sit down and get on with it.
They have a topic that they're not interested in, so they are honest. And they say when it's good or bad or helpful. When it's good, I tell them that we will take it seriously and we will try and make changes where we can, but it's not always going to be fun all the time. We can't.
There is a case
we
of
try.
getting things that
There are
matter,
certain
yes.
things that we just have to obviously
Mixed
do.
number of
But,
risks.
yeah, but we do evaluate. And
Any other comments on that one? Yeah.
I've done a lot more this last year of like meeting evaluation, I'm using photographs of gymnastics performances and their ICT
Yes.
and it's been so valuable because it's the quiet ones in the class that wouldn't speak out like that,
Yes.
that have actually almost walked tears to my eyes because they've said how much they've loved it and how they can't wait to do it again and things and how valuable it was and how they want to do more of it. So we've made sure that's happened.
And the negative feedback and the feedback on the process is so important too. And I find myself teaching the same lecture like a dozen times to each of our 12 teaching groups in some years. And every time I'll end the lecture with, okay, what should I do differently for the next group? And I had one trainer who said, are you seriously asking? Yes, and it's like the second year. How had nobody not asked that question before? Isn't this part and parcel of what we should be doing? And of course, I evaluate my own teaching. But I think feedback from them is so good. We're collaborating with them to build their knowledge. Their job is about learning stuff. And we're going to have to help them do that, in my view. At any rate, the other ideas are there too in this sort of agile development world. One of which is the minimum viable product. And it does have to be a viable product. It is the thing that works. Anybody figured out what the picture is, by the way? There's a clue in the colours. Sorry? It is Lego, yes. Where have you seen these colours recently on that interweb thing? Google. This is Google's first server. Okay? Made out of Lego, isn't that bad in terms of kindergarten and protocols and so on, or allegedly Google's first server. I think the two figures at the top must be Page and Grin up there. That's just so cool. So you have this notion of, in software development, or at least in some agile development approaches, coming up with at least a product that at least works, that does the bare minimum for it to still be viable, for it to still satisfy at least some of the requirements, or the essential requirements. And I suspect as we move from ICT, which we've done very well, to computing, which is a new challenge for many of us, let's focus on the minimum viable product first, and get something that at least works. And then we can do what they would call refactoring the code and improving the code and doing that iterative stuff and making it better and better and better the next time round, not producing the laminated lesson plans for September 2014. Another idea you have in agile development is this notion of the sprint. And they use the phrase time boxing here. And of course, in our line of work, we're very familiar with time boxing. We have the timetable, we have the 40-minute or the hour-long or the half-hour period of work in which to get things done. They tend to work with slightly longer time boxes than that, but the idea is still a powerful one, and during that time box we need to produce something which satisfies the requirement. They talk about the product backlog, which is the list of features that the product is supposed to have, and we will identify which of those product features are part of the sprint backlog and assign those tasks, and during that time box we make sure that we get that bit of code, that feature, that bit of the product backlog ticked off. We start with the planning meeting, we end with a couple of looking back meetings. One where we review what we've actually produced, and another where we think about the processes through which we produce that. Okay, you could try that lesson by lesson, but it perhaps makes more sense week by week, or unit of work by unit of work. Here's what we're going to do within this half term, within this 2-week period. Did it work? What worked well? What should we try differently next time? And then these meetings are often run on this system which they call the scrum there. And what's the scrum all about? It's, I believe, the way of getting the ball back into play. And the scrum meetings are standing up, and the scrum meetings are time boxed, and they take no longer typically than 15 minutes, which is a good length for a meeting. You'll think about that in the next long after-school staff meeting, won't you? Okay, you stand up and you answer 3 questions. Yeah? What did you do since the last meeting? What are your plans for between now and the next meeting, and what's stopping you from doing that? And why not apply that idea to your lesson plans? Yeah? What have you done since we last reviewed? What are you going to do before our next review? Certainly when they're working on more extended project work. And what's stopping you from getting on with that at the moment? And I wonder, actually, those of you who are sort of heads of department or subject leaders, is that not something you could do in your subject meetings too? Could you do a whole school staff meeting as a scrum? Maybe a staff briefing. Worth trying once in a while. We, of course, anybody still working in the sort of one computer between two children type ICT room or computer lab? Do you make a virtue of that?
Yeah, I think if they're not
Of course, there's only one of you, there's 30 odd of them. Why not use their expertise to help one scaffold build up, develop one another's learning? And so, in Agile or extreme programming, you have this notion of pair programming. And you have two quite distinct, there's evidence to support the view that this is more efficient, more effective, produces more reliable code than two people working independently in parallel. Yeah? So you have two people working together, one computer, one keyboard, one mouse. Two different roles. One has the sort of driving seat position of actually working at the keyboard or writing code and putting in semicolons and curly brackets and so on. And the other takes the sort of navigator position, keeping an eye overview of the project as a whole, thinking about how this bit will link to the other bit, thinking about what libraries you can draw on there. And why not, those of you who are working in computer rooms where you've only got half as many computers as children, and the rest of you who could do it that way if you want, have them working collaboratively like that. Okay, maybe make them swap over at half time or swap over to the next lesson. But, really work collaboratively rather than what you sometimes see everyone try doing will do well. Okay. Moving on, this notion of the pattern language, we talked about this briefly earlier. You had this idea, Christopher Alexander writing back in the 70s, about the common problems which architects, town planners encounter. But there are certain reliable, good ways to plan a town, to build a house. Where you put the windows, how you have the entrance to the house. And what he documents in this classic book in that particular domain is what those difficult problems are and what seems to be a good way of solving that. And it's not so much his solution, although his solutions are broadly speaking very sound, I think, but the idea of a language to describe the problems and their solution. That's the real insight there. And then the object-oriented programming crowd took that on with the design patterns for object-oriented software there, and take, again, when you're writing that sort of code, you have common problems that keep popping up. Let's have a reliable solution to that. It's not a copy and paste solution, or their code seems to work, I'll just paste it in there. But their method for solving that sort of problem is one which I can see apply to my sort of problem in a slightly different context. Surely we can do that in our domain too. So Hoover and Oshnai, 2009, the text of this is in the public domain, or at least is Creative Commons licensed, saying, okay, let's take this pattern language idea and apply it to the process of becoming a software developer. What are the common problems that people experience in their career as a software developer, and what are good, reliable solutions to that? And then Diana Lorillard, writing the book which I would very much like to have written if only I had the time and indeed the ability, is this notion of teaching the pedagogic pattern language. What are the common problems that we face teaching particular material, teaching particular ideas, or approaching our tasks? And what are common patterns to solving those sorts of problems? This is from the Hoover and Oshnai bit. This, I think, is particularly relevant to this process of becoming this is the first stages of your career. I think it's relevant to my line of work in teacher training. Look for the people, look for the kindred spirits, look for the people who share your enthusiasms and work with them on joint projects. And find your mentors, find the people who can guide, counsel you in your career. They don't necessarily have to be in your school or your line managers, but somebody within the same domain. And then sharing those ideas. There's this lovely thing about open source software, and we're hearing some examples of great examples of open source software for schools earlier on today. But there's this thing called GitHub. Anybody come across GitHub? Massive, massive repository of open source code. These are programs which is the name, isn't it? Okay, it's not an ideal name to introduce to you, I'm sure. But you've got these lovely, lovely examples of code which does things really very, very well. And they don't just let you download the program for free. They show you what the code looks like. And there's a mechanism in there. Okay, I'm going to take this code, I'm going to change this code and make a better bit of software from this. You can do this on the Scratch community site as well. You upload your project to the Scratch website. Other Scratchers download that, make changes to it, and make it their own. So what does that mean in our line of work? Well, I suppose we have this open education resources thing, certainly in higher education, which is posting up my lecture slides, posting up their course content, and letting other people access that. But wouldn't it be better to go beyond that and let other people adapt that and share that back into the community? So I write something, and then other people take that and make that even better. We could do this, I hope we do this when it comes to planning in your school. So what we want, perhaps, to make this a reality is the GitHub for lesson plans. And if that idea has occurred to me, then it's occurred to people much cleverer than me, like Peps McRae, who works at the University of Brighton. I think this is about 2 minutes of video. He's going to explain about Open Plan.
So some people have been describing this project as a GitHub for teachers. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it, actually. Because whilst on the surface it appears to be a social lesson planning tool for teachers, as soon as you begin to dig a bit deeper, you see that it's been very deliberately designed to foster more sophisticated pedagogical practice. So some people are hugely important because we know that the best way to improve education is to improve instruction. In all my experience, both as a teacher and a teacher educator, I continue to be gobsmacked by the fact that the majority of teachers plan their lessons in complete isolation. That's just crazy when you consider both the importance of that planning process, but also the economics of the situation. It means you've got hundreds and thousands of teachers all planning for similar topics, but not building on each other's thinking. It's a real waste. And so what we would like to achieve is a situation where when teachers sit down to plan a lesson, they start with something that's already been through the minds and the classrooms of 1,000 teachers before them. And I think, I'm sure you'd agree that you're going to get some really interesting things starting to happen if we can do that. So we're planning on building a tool where teachers can share, plan and organise their lessons online, where they can fork other teachers' lessons so they can remix, repurpose those lessons whilst crediting original and subsequent authors. But most importantly, where they have a space to plan using a blank plain text canvas that's overlaid with a pedagogical markup language. It might be helpful to think about that as a kind of friendly HTML in a Scratch environment. And so what would happen when we begin to do this is that teachers get an insight into the pedagogical decisions that other teachers have made, and that'll really help develop a greater common language for teaching across the profession. So we're really excited about this project. We think it's got huge potential for impact, and we hope that other people are too.
Thank you very much, Peps. Isn't that a lovely idea? No? How many people are doing collaborative planning in their schools at the moment? That's brilliant. Are any of you sharing that beyond your school? Let's try and move to that. You are? Do you know what other people are doing with that? That's lovely then. And what a super idea is we've got all of this opportunity for working to a new curriculum. But let's not just keep doing that in isolation. Let's not just do that. Write all of these how to teach a game in Scratch lesson plans ourselves. But let's work together on that to produce really lesson plans. Take the one person's idea and adapt them to our particular context. Don't laminate them. Okay, so holding. Moving on now to, so Agile, has been around for a little while now. There's a growth out from that movement. But Agile itself has some limitations. So you have then this notion of software craftsmanship, which starts with the Agile idea, but takes that a stage further yet. And so you see the Agile stuff in there, which says, yes, let's start with the Agile stuff, working software, being responsive to change, thinking about individuals and interactions, thinking about collaborating with our customers. They're really important, but we can go beyond there. And one of the criticisms with Agile is the customer is never satisfied. The requirements keep changing all of the time. We never actually get the working code out from there because they never make up their mind as to what it's supposed to do. And software craftsmanship says, be responsive to the change, but actually it's not just about keeping the customer happy. You've got to produce software that adds value. Isn't that important in our line of work too. Being friendly with the children, being responsive to what happens in the class, absolutely great. Child-centered education, lovely, lovely stuff. We do need to build up their knowledge. We are there to teach them. They need to know more, be able to do more, and learn something at the end of the lesson rather than have a fun time listening to us. And yeah, the working software is great to produce something that works, but actually, look for that shiny example of this is the best lesson that I could teach. And I hope we've all had that experience of teaching the lesson from the book, the lesson plan that actually should be learned, because that's pretty much as good as it's going to get at that point. And that's perhaps issue coverage. And yeah, focus on the individuals and interactions in front of you. But remember you're part of the community of practice, and that it's not just your class that you have a responsibility to as a profession. You have this, your contribution to the profession as a whole. Think of it not so much in terms of continuing professional development as the continuing development of the profession. And that those of you who are master craftsmen in this domain have some responsibility to developing the craft rather than just developing your own craft. And yeah, the customer collaboration is really, really important, but also think about the wider partnerships and making them productive, bringing in the external expertise, taking the children out into the IT industry and seeing what happens there. So, Richard said it, talking about craftsmanship in general, and isn't this a lovely insight? And you'll see this all time and time and time again when you're doing the programming stuff in school. That is by fixing things that we understand how they work. The debugging thing is such an important part of the learning the computing stuff. But do you not think that also applies in our line of work too? How much of your development as a professional has been coloured by the things that didn't work for you, that child who just didn't get it, and the sort of diagnosis of identifying what the bug was, if you'll allow the expression there, fixing that particular bug, working with the child. Okay, how can I overcome that stumbling block, that difficulty? And again, Lorillard in design science, the first two, we're doing this all of the time, of course, as craftsmen, as teachers. But yeah, the last 2 points there, building on the works of others, the open plan type ideas, the GitHub for lesson planning. And then the pattern language of sharing what we do with that wider community for their benefit as well as for our own. Okay, a little bit on testing. It's supposed to be on the slide. Yeah. His school hall still looks like that. Kind of moved out of that season now. Hopefully your hall is back to normal. We do plenty of testing. You've got that in Agile development too. You have this notion of test-driven development. And I think there's a nice insight here. Test-driven development says you write the test that fails first time. So you want your software to do something. You write a test to check whether it can do that, and initially it has to fail the test. That's essential, because otherwise it would already be doing that and you wouldn't need to do any work. And our friends from HNI often come into our classrooms and demand to see evidence of progress during every single lesson. They satisfy the learning outcomes. The children have learnt the things which you've taught them. That, in all honesty, is not evidence of progress. Unless you can also show that they couldn't do that at the start of the lesson. How much of our time, how much of their time do we, if you'll allow me, waste by just teaching them stuff which they already know? The Secretary of State's criticisms of the old ICT approaches was so much of that, I think, was based on teaching them things which they already know. If you think PowerPoint from year 1 all the way through to A level, or at least AS, are you not in danger of repeating the same ideas several times? So yeah, test-driven development, let's check what they know first. Assessment of learning, if you will, and then teach them something so that they can do that at the end of it. So failure is not actually a problem. Fail better, get better at doing these things. We need to check that they know what they're doing. And then you refactor the code, you remove duplication, you produce a more elegant solution to that. You simplify, make a more elegant solution to this. Lisa Crispin has this notion of the agile testing quadrants. I think it's a helpful idea once we start translating it. She says you've got to think about these sort of 4 quadrants here. You have one axis which starts with technology facing and then is business facing, and another one which is about supporting the team, the process stuff, and another one which is critiquing the product, the task stuff. And again, I think this translates well into our domain. If you think in terms of assessment, a lot of it is about content knowledge. Do they know these things? And I put that down at the bottom of this technology facing. But then you've got the business facing aspect, which for me is, can they use these things? Will this be useful to them in their lives? Can they apply this to solve other problems? Is that something which will make a difference to them? And then on the other axis, supporting the team, that's the process stuff. How is it going? Do we understand these ideas? It's the very formative assessment side of things. And then critiquing the product, the summative assessment. Have they acquired this knowledge? Do they know how to do this? Can they evidence that? Talking of evidence, I talked briefly about this to those of you who were with me this morning. We didn't get very many. Anybody in the room who's involved with Cub Scouts, Guides, Brownies? Thank you very much. That's good to see. Anybody who used to be Cub Scout, Guide, Brownie? Okay, they have this lovely approach to assessment in the scouting and guiding movement. You have very, very clear criteria, correct me if I'm wrong here, about this is a particular unit of learning. Once I satisfy those criteria, provide evidence of that, I've got the badge to show that. And there are many, I want to use the word platoon, but you call them guide companies or something. What's the term?
Actually, we're in troop scouts.
Okay, scout troop. Whatever the technical vocabulary is there. Some will say you choose from the whole menu of badges what you want to work towards. And isn't that a powerful idea? Okay, once you're supposed to be drawing parallels between software development and teaching, what's this Scouts Guide Grant? Well, this applies in software development too. So Stack Overflow, which is a wonderful community of software developers. Anyway, if you ever have problems with this stuff, get them onto or go onto Stack Overflow and ask the question in there. Get your older pupils using Stack Overflow. And notice what the badges are on Stack Overflow. These are the gold ones. These are the sort of high standards. Of course, some of this is about giving a great answer, giving a legendary contribution there. Some of this is about being popular. And there are also things here about asking a stellar question, asking a really good question. Isn't that something which we ought to be recognising with our learners too? Asking the question is just as important, often, as the answer. So again, our friends in Mozilla, people who are bringing Firefox, have got the infrastructure for that across all sorts of domains. So they're thinking in terms of a lot of the coding skills and some of the work which they're doing, but the infrastructure there of recognising particular granular skills, competences, literacies with this sort of badge accreditation, I think is a very powerful and flexible one. And pretty much, finally, the space to learn. One of these photographs is a primary school ICT room / computer lab. The other is the office of a global technology firm. Would anybody like to suggest which is which? If you set up your ICT room so that it looks like a call center, or there must be other people in the room who can remember them typing pool, then doesn't that send a powerful message about how you see ICT, what you see that subject as like? If you set it up as a cool Web 2 happening startup or a design studio, then that sends an equally powerful message out. Now, you know you don't all have control over what your classrooms look like. But if you can't do it in terms of architecture and interior design, then you can do it in terms of the way you teach. And I'm not saying that you were doing it that way, I'm sure you weren't. But moving the teaching from something which feels like call center, do this, do this, do this, well done, you've done the work, okay, you clock in, clock out, to something where we have our own interesting projects to offer. Anybody know what Google 20% time is? You can Google it. Tell us about Google 20% time. Absolutely. If you're an engineer working for Google, the people working in the call centre selling advertising, either in London or Ireland, depending on where you want to pay the tax, and the people who are scanning books for Google Books don't get that 20% time of work. They wish they did. With the Google engineers, 20% of their time, 20% of their week, they get to choose what they work on. Could we not do that in our curriculums too? 1 day a week, you choose what you teach. 1 day a week, they choose what they learn. Wow. I remember doing this when I was in primary school. I know I'm not as good as I look, but I do remember doing this when I was in primary school. Thursday afternoon, we chose our topic. I have no recollection that there was any sort of list to pick from. I did stamps in year 5 and tea in year 6, and class 5, class 6, as we called it then, which said more about me and the curriculum, which we had back then. But wouldn't it be nice to do that? And, you know, the Secretary of State assures us in the national curriculum we have time and space in the year to do that. And there are schools which are taking those ideas seriously. You know, if you can fit it in, well, maybe not 20%, but 1 afternoon a week to do something which isn't on the curriculum, which is your passion, your enthusiasm, or their passion, their enthusiasm. What a liberating thing. Thank you very much. Email address is up on screen. There's a blog which I don't maintain as much as I ought to. There's a Twittery thing there which I do use a lot. If you want to see these slides again, those of you who are suffering from insomnia, I believe I've got a recording on the machine, and you can get those at bit.me/HantsICT. I have a little bit of time for questions, unless you're wanting to use it to wrap up.
No, you go for it.
All right. Anyway. That's a relief. In which case, thank you all very much.